All right. Thank you so much there for Elise. And wondering why my will begin in just a moment didn't pop up. I guess it's blocked. I guess it's blocked by, yeah, it's blocked by Krystal. And you can see Krystal there with RFK Jr. It was an interesting discussion, and I want to dedicate this show before I get into the specifics. By the way, please join me. It's a free-for-all. So free-for-all means I want to talk to you especially. I always want to talk to you. I mean, every program, every live stream I do, when I'm live, obviously it can't be when I'm not live, I want to talk to you. Oh, there's the will begin in a moment. Let's get rid of that because we've already begun. So it's the free-for-all, so that means you call in 240-363-7190. Anything we've discussed this week, anything that's come up this week, anything you want to talk about, what you had for breakfast. Do you prefer oatmeal with brown sugar or honey? We can discuss that. This program, from my perspective, I want to shout out to my friend in the on the Central Coast, I believe Santa Cruz County, not Monterey, Vernon. I spoke to him yesterday, and Vernon's going to be on our program next week, Wednesday. It'll be a later start because he's on the left coast. So we'll start at noon on Wednesday. A lot to discuss with Vernon. Always fun, always, I think, informative, always controversial. So it should be a great program. Vernon and I were talking about doing these live streams. He's a broadcaster too. He is focused on radio, though not live streaming. And he said something that was very important, interesting to me, which was, I have a lot to say. This is Vernon, but I don't know if I want to compete with, the 8 billion people that are out there on YouTube. And that's not much of an exaggeration. As I understand it, there are about 1 billion YouTube channels. Now, not every YouTube channel has live streams, has videos posted, but millions, many, many millions do. So, I'm a tiny fish in an enormous ocean right now, in the YouTube ocean. So why am I doing this? And that was a question that I've grappled with. And so I wanted to try to answer that, because if there are others who are more successful, and obviously many have more viewers than I do, more subscribers, which, by the way, leads us to please click like, please click subscribe. Again, if there are others out there who have more market penetration than I do, and they're saying the same things I do, and they have the same message that I do, then why do this, right? I mean, I don't need to sell more widgets if the marketplace is flooded with outstanding widgets. It would not only be, unnecessary from a perspective of the market of trying to provide an essential good or service since it's already being provided. It also would be economically stupid, right? I mean, people are already going to buy the widgets they have. They're not going to buy a new widget if the widget they have is serving the purposes that they need it to, and there's no particular change, difference, advantage to using my widget. Well, I believe and this is what this program is trying to do, is present today, this free-for-all, unless you call, of course, is to present how my program really is different, how there aren't, at least to my knowledge, anything out there like it. We'll start with this video clip. I'm going to play clips from 3 programs, let you know, starting obviously with Krystal, and she's interviewing Krystal. By the way, that's Krystal Ball, and she's now married to Kyle Kulinski, so congratulations to the two of them. And she's on with Saagar and Jetty. That's her very popular program. I guess it's popular. I don't know. She used to do the Hill Rising with Saagar, and then they moved on to do their own thing and breaking points, and they're trying to monetize it by selling subscription. And the Hill now has Rising with Robbie Suave and Brianna Joy Gray as their main hosts, and they have other hosts too. And I think that's a pretty good program, actually. Probably that's the one that's closest in spirit and content to what I do. At least that's my opinion. But I like Krystal and Saagar sometimes. I like Jimmy. I used to really like Jimmy. I've kind of lost a little bit of my feelings for him in a positive direction. We'll play a clip from Jimmy, and we'll also play a clip from a show I've always loathed, the Sam Cedar Show, and we'll get into all 3. And they're all related to this particular interview with RFK Jr. So let's start with Krystal interviewing RFK Jr. She gets a lot of heat from Jimmy, and RFK Jr. gets a lot of heat from Emma of Cedar Show. And I think they're all wrong. And I'll explain to you where criticism is warranted and where it is not. We'll talk about all of that. You can certainly weigh in. Let's start with Krystal interviewing RFK Jr. about vaccines. Oh, finally, one other point. Now, so the vaccines, and you're like, Hal, would you just get to the damn program? I get that. But I just want to make this last point. This is a specific segment that was set up to discuss RFK Jr.'s points on vaccines. There will be discussion of energy as well. I don't think we should only focus on his vaccine views at all, but they're relevant, they're important, and it's completely appropriate. In fact, I like the way Krystal, frankly, handles part of this in terms of her questioning. All right, enough of me. Let's get to the interview.
People who think like I do.
Well, but just tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
How do you know?
All right, so I want to just jump in right there, because this is going to become a stalking horse, where she says, when he says, well, where do you think I got it wrong? Which I found to be a somewhat disingenuous question, because we all know the general parameters of where we disagree with RFK Jr. It's his consistent skepticism of any kind of vaccinations. And that's clear. And he knows that. So for him to say, well, and I, by the way, like that question a lot. If someone makes a general statement, Hal, you're just full of crap, nothing you say is true, then I'm going to immediately respond with, well, give me an example? Because I don't know, what am I supposed to defend? But she was being pretty specific. She said, it's about your vaccines. And, I don't agree with you on vaccines. And it's not a secret what his if someone said to me, I don't agree with your energy policy, Hal, with your response to the climate cataclysm, I don't think you have the right answer. I would pretty much think that I know what they're talking about, which is taxing fossil fuels, the fossil fuels tax at an ever higher rate. I would assume that they meant they don't agree with me that we should start taxing fossil fuels at an ever higher and higher rate and keep raising the rate. I would get that. I might ask, I say, is that what you're talking about? So I know, maybe they're talking about tariffs, because that is also a way to respond to the, crisis. Because I've said free trade is really bad for the climate crisis. But for RFK Jr. to say, well, tell me what I got wrong, that's kind of BS, right? I mean, we know where he knows. Let me put it a different way. He may not agree with the criticism, but he knows flat out where people don't share his view and where it's super controversial. And that is that skepticism about all vaccines all the time. So I was irritated when he even asked that question. And I like it when people say, well, what did I get wrong? Because lots of times you don't know where they're coming from. At least I don't. But in this case, he should have known. He absolutely, and he probably did, and he's full of crap when he said, look, I like RFK Jr. still my choice. This program is not designed to get you not to vote for RFK Jr. If you don't, you don't. I mean, these are the facts. You make your decision based on what you think is most important. I don't think vaccine skepticism is the most important issue right now in our time. So I'm not basing my vote in the Democratic primary on whether you're a vaccine skeptic. But I didn't particularly appreciate RFK Jr. feigning ignorance of what people disagree with him on vaccines. All right, let's get this back up.
Wrong.
Well, I think you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
How do you know? Let me ask you this. How do you know there's not a hard science?
All right, so that's, again, a BS. First of all, she said there isn't hard scientific evidence connecting autism with the use of basically to parse it, the use of thimerosal, which is no longer used, but it's a mercury derivative that was used to keep some vaccines, I think smallpox, cold, right? For storage purposes and for transportation purposes, they would store it in a solution of this mercury compound, thimerosal, which is a poison, which is a toxin. And some researchers said, well, maybe it's the storage of these childhood vaccines, because we're seeing a big rise in autism, which may or may not reflect a rise in the actual incidence of autism, or does it just reflect a rise in the diagnosis of autism? I don't know if we really know yet if that's if it's an observed rise or if it's a real rise. Unclear. But it could be real, and it's certainly plausible, right? That some, vaccine that everybody takes as a very young child or infant could cause some sort of disease that we're seeing, or brain disorder that we're seeing now in high numbers. It's plausible, and one or two studies seem to suggest not that there was a correlation. By the way, we'll get into correlation causation. So Krystal says, well, there's nothing that shows that it's true. Well, that's not nearly strong enough. The truth is that the evidence is overwhelming that that autism isn't caused by thimerosal. There's not a dispute. It's not open for debate. And this is what kind of irritated. I don't want to say irritated, but she could have said that. She could have said, no, there isn't that link. It isn't there. And this has been demonstrated by numerous studies, which I'll put up on the screen in a second. But that did kind of frustrate me, that, she wasn't quicker and she didn't say it. But still, that's not a real flaw in the interview. It's just the technique or the preparation could have been a little bit stronger, maybe. But that said, I don't think Krystal Ball was anticipating that he was going to be so, what's the word I'm looking for? So well, how do you know? How can you prove that? What's your evidence for that? When, he knows all the evidence, and, he doesn't want to acknowledge it. So that's the point. And, I don't know where you go with that. Except, okay, well, you weren't up for a debate, and I'm just kind of trying to I had a study up talking about poor preparation, but let me just put this up real quick. This study here, and this is published in the National Institute of Health, but it was from the Clinical Infectious Diseases publication, the review there that they publish. The Journal of Clinical Infectious Diseases, February 15, 2009. And the conclusion was unquestionably that there is not a link, that they have reviewed 20 studies, and all 20 studies showed the same thing, which was, and these were studies in different countries that were used different styles, okay? And they all said that it's just not true. We just don't have evidence to suggest that the use of thimerosal in vaccines for storage purposes is behind or is responsible for an increase in the incidence of autism. So, it's not that there isn't evidence to prove the link. It's that the evidence proves there's no association. And this is very I mean, that's the bottom line. Now, when I do my program, I don't worry about whether people are going to like what I have to say. I mean, I can't. I talk about what I think is important. But it's very hard for me. In fact, my son pointed out to me yesterday that Sasha Stone, if you remember, I had Sasha Stone on to talk about the weakness of the case against Donald Trump, the criminal charges. And that program got a huge, the biggest by far. My Sasha Stone live stream got the most viewers of any of my programs. But she unfriended me yesterday, or unfollowed me, I think is the term. And I was like, well, did my son send her some nasty tweets? Because I asked him, I said, because he does have access, unfortunately, to my Twitter account. I won't want to get into all of that. But I thought, well, maybe he sent her something. And he's like, no. And he said, and how do I know why she unfollowed you? Maybe it's because you're just, you're too far to the left. You're not, a Trumper, which she is. You're not hard right, which she is. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. That's a good point. Okay, I'll accept that. So I don't, if I was really just focused on having a big audience, I would take a consistent view, and this is something I also spoke with Vernon about, but I don't. So my support for those who criticize Russiagate and and Trump derangement syndrome in general, gets me some fans on the right, on the Trump side, and has turned many of you off. But then when I talk about, say, the climate cataclysm or the obvious failure of the anti-vaccine movement to prove that there's a link between vaccines and autism, or even when I talk about how the COVID vaccines actually were useful. I don't say they were as good as they could have been, as they were certainly not anywhere near what they were advertised to be. And I do think there are very important questions about Fauci's probity, about his honesty to us. I think those about corruption and NIH, I think those are all valid. But that said, we did benefit from the vaccine. It didn't do everything we wanted, but it's pretty darn clear that there are fewer deaths, that more people are alive today, that fewer people got really sick, fewer people have that long COVID as a result of the vaccines. So, it's nuanced. I provide you with nuance. And a lot of people don't want it. And they only want their left side or their right side, or however they present themselves. Politically are, you want the people that you listen to, that you watch, you want them to reflect your viewpoint on everything. And that's unfortunate, because all of us are wrong a lot of time. All of us are wrong a lot of the time. And it's better, including me, and it's better that we be open to it. All right. So I've got a little bit here, but it's clear from the studies that there's no link. So let me see if I can get this. This is something I should just popped up here from, again, NIH. And there just isn't, I don't know where to go with this. Autism is not caused by vaccines. And that's the fact. And it's too bad that, people just don't want to accept that. And I will admit, I was a little bit of a believer that maybe there's something there. It did seem like it for a moment in time. But no. So let's see if we can get this. All right. Findings of researchers in recent studies are consistent. This is again, NIH, are consistent with those of previous studies that have not shown an association between TCVs, that's the thimerosal, and autism. Of the studies we identified, only one claims an association that is of questionable design and should not form the basis. And we have not been using thimerosal for many years now, and we are not seeing an increase. We're not seeing a decrease in observed autism. So therefore, that debunks the claim. And RFK Jr. is simply wrong. And it's frustrating to me that this is disputed. Now, he got some other things wrong too, I want to get to. And again, Krystal kind of, sort of. Now remember, I'm an RFK Jr. supporter. I like RFK Jr. I want him, frankly, more than anyone else would prefer him to be the next president that I know who's running. Certainly more than either DeSantis or Trump, but also more than Marianne Williamson and more than Biden. And we'll get into why a little bit later. But, his policies on issue after issue, vax and anti-vax is not the most important issue right now.
I don't think the vaccine worked. I think, if you think it worked, then try to explain to me the countries that were unvaccinated did much better than our.
Many of those countries, because there are a lot of different factors in various countries. So a lot of those countries that you.
By the way, I don't know that I believe what he just said. The countries that are unvaxxed did better. I don't know what country he's talking about. Maybe it's New Zealand. But New Zealand, remember, threw up all sorts of walls to prevent anyone in. They tried to quarantine the entire country, or quarantine the entire world, I should say, because they, for a long time, simply didn't have anyone with COVID. They kept them out of the country. But ultimately, it did make it to NZ as well, New Zealand as well. I don't know what countries weren't vaccinated. So I can't state with absolute certitude he's wrong there. I think he's wrong, but we'll get to the next claim, which is clearly bullshit.
Pointed out before.
Why do we have the highest death rate in the world by far?
I think there are a lot of.
All right. So he said, why do we have the highest death rate in the world so far there? And Krystal says, I think there are a lot of factors. So she buys that. Now, again, that wasn't ideal. And it kind of gave Jimmy an opportunity to go after her a little bit, which I think was unfortunate. But it's just not true. The U.S. did not have the highest death rate in the world, not close. So let's look at, this is from Johns Hopkins study. These are not all the countries in the world. It's a selected group. So this is observed case fatality ratio. So that means people who were definitely diagnosed with COVID who died. So the U.S. clearly isn't at the top of that list. And we're not even close. This is what, 15 countries, something like that, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's 15. I don't know how they selected them either. Observed case fatality ratio. So Peru is at the very top, Mexico. We're below Canada. We're right around Spain, Italy, Portugal, Brazil, there's a lot of countries above us. So when he says we had the most deaths, it's just not true. It's just false. And I wish that had been called out. Now, there's going to be you could push back on this. You could say, no, that's observed case fatality ratio, but you should really go by deaths per 100,000 because, and it's an interesting argument that I accept to a degree. There's two different ways of measuring. One is who was diagnosed, how many people had COVID, and how many of those people died. That's one way. Clearly, using that standard, the U.S. is nowhere near the top of the most fatalities, notwithstanding what RFK Jr. said. He's just wrong. You could also go by a different metric, which is deaths per 100,000. That's assuming that whatever country had the most deaths per 100,000 people had the most COVID deaths, because that's the consistent factor across time and space, is that we have this worldwide COVID epidemic, and we don't know how well it's being diagnosed. And there are many countries where they don't have penetration of researchers, and not everyone gets treatment, not everyone goes to the doctor. So we don't know how many people had COVID, but we do know pretty accurately how many people die. So those countries that have the highest death rates are the ones with the most COVID deaths. And that's a good, that's possible. And the US did not do, is higher on the list of mortality or deaths per 100,000 people. It is much higher on the list. And in the 15 countries that we just saw, we're second to Peru. But Peru is much, much like 2, 3, 4 times higher than we are. So Peru was the country, I think we can state with pretty confidently, had by far the most COVID deaths. Now, I don't know why that is. I have no answer to that. I can't explain it. All I can say is when RFK Jr. says we had the highest COVID death rate, it's just not true. And if you look at the actual list of countries where you determine COVID death rate by mortality rather than deaths per case, you find again the US. We didn't do great. I'm not defending it, but we're far from the top. So let's see if you can see this list. I had to kind of minimize it. It wasn't easy to do this. I did the best I could. So again, Peru, the most deadly country by COVID. Then you have 4 others on the first page there: Bulgaria, Hungary, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and North Macedonia. So southeastern Europe is clearly hit hard. Bulgaria and those other countries are all southeastern, while Hungary sort of more south or central. U.S. is not at the top. You have the deaths right there on the right. 665 Peru down to North Macedonia. Let's keep going down that list, because per RFK Jr., we had the highest deaths. Well, you can go to the next page and you see we're not on that page either. You can see Montenegro, Croatia, Georgia, Czechia. I guess that's the Czech Republic, I believe, or what I used to call the Czech Republic, or what I used to call Czechoslovakia. There's Czechia, there's Slovakia. Again, not on this list. So let's go down. So that's the second page. So then we go down to the third. Okay? And here we do find the U.S. After Slovakia, I guess those are on both pages, San Marino, Lithuania, Romania, U.S. So we're about 15th in the world. It's not good. It's a bad look. It's a bad place for us to be. But it's nowhere close to the highest death rate in the world. We're a little bit higher than 1/2 of Peru. So again, RFK Jr. just wrong, flat out wrong. And the one thing I wish from that interview with our friend Krystal is that she had been a little more quick to put those slides that I just showed up. And I would have thought she might have been ready for that. I don't know. I would have thought, or they have a producer, maybe Saagar's furiously typing like I always do. All right, let's get to Jimmy's, I think, mean-spirited attack on Krystal Moore. Now, it doesn't bring me a lot of joy. The reason I'm talking about this, I've always been, until very, very recently, certainly when he was on the Young Turks and when he went on his own, I've always admired Jimmy Dore. I love the fact that he calls everyone out. He's not beholden to anyone. I think he did an amazing job bringing us Aaron Mate and challenging the BS, Russiagate narrative all the way through. He was spot on, 100% right. Did us a huge service, and those who refuse to accept that, it's too bad. But it's the same if you still believe the Russiagate narrative, and many of you do. It's the same as believing that autism is caused by thimerosal, by vaccines. It isn't. There isn't a causal link between thimerosal and vaccines, notwithstanding what RFK Jr. says, and autism. And notwithstanding what everyone in the Democratic establishment has said for years and years, notwithstanding Hillary Clinton's excuses for losing, notwithstanding the Washington Post and the New York Times and everyone else, Trump didn't conspire with Putin. Trump did not plan some kind of dump of mostly accurate criticisms on social media of Hillary Clinton. So those are two falsehoods. Don't believe them. Jimmy's really pissed off at Crystal Ball because when he got into a huge spat with TYT, a big food fight with the Young Turks, he said some things about Anna Kasparian, which frankly I didn't think was a big deal. But he was called out as being sexist. I don't really think it was true. And Crystal and Kyle cut him off at the knees, wouldn't have him on their show. And he was pissed, and I get that. But you know what? You can be angry, but don't just go after someone because you're pissed off and make nasty comments. So this is how I'm different. I'm analyzing every issue. I'm not taking it from a anti-Democratic Party perspective. I'm not taking it from an anti-Republican Party perspective. I'm not a partisan. I'm here to try to bring you the facts. I'm not even taking it from an anti-capitalist perspective or a pro-socialist. Every issue, every controversy can be looked at through different lenses. And my lens has always been, does it make life better for poor, struggling, and working people? Does it reduce the power and influence of the elites? And I don't think a pure socialist economy is plausible. I also don't think that it would necessarily make life better for most people. I think the way to make life better for most people is to have a market-based economy where there is private enterprise, but it is very strictly regulated by the state in certain areas, and where the regulation by the state will make things worse, we don't. So here's Jimmy's ridiculous really unfair attack on Crystal.
Tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think
that's not coming.
Well, it was coming because she right out said, because you drew a link, we already saw it. So Jimmy's just flat out wrong. It does come. And his look like, oh yeah, it's fine for RFK Jr. to say, well, what did you get? What have I gotten wrong? Well, we already went over that too. It's not fine. It's very clear what the main criticism of RFK Jr. is, and it's a legitimate one. Your reflexive opposition to all vaccines does not acknowledge, does not reflect the remarkable advances in health that we have achieved in large part because of vaccines. Even today, with all the corruption, which you're right to point out, in big pharma and for-profit healthcare, vaccines are still making life better for billions of people on the planet.
Okay, here we go.
you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
A correlation, there is.
Well, they're going to say this. We don't know. See, because is there really a true correlation? Yes, there's been a correlation. There might have been. There's a rise in the observed incidence of autism, but that doesn't mean there really was a rise in autism. It just may be that, again, it's being diagnosed more frequently, but there were many undiagnosed cases in the past. And I believe that, by the way. For example, there's been a remarkable rise in the diagnoses of ADHD, which is a spectrum disorder, many believe. So part of the autism disorder, maybe. I have ADHD. I struggle with ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD. When I was a kid, nobody was diagnosed with it. It was just like, oh, you're just a kid. You're just a little bit more, boisterous or rambunctious. So that's a case where it's not clear that there's a correlation between the thimerosal and an actual rise in autism. It may be, again, just like with me, where my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was not diagnosed until I was an adult. because people weren't diagnosed back then. That's all.
Let me ask you
Correlation.
this.
Yeah, there is a correlation.
Doesn't mean
she
causation.
meant causation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she throws that out there, and he's ready to back it up. He's certainly ready. Let's watch.
How do you know there's not a hard scientific?
All right, that's not backing it up. That's a load of crap. He'll say, "Oh, I got all these studies. I got this. I got..." You know what? He didn't cite to one. And I'm not gonna, I'm gonna move on because it's already 11:40. But it is the free for all. So I hope to hear from you. 240-363-7190. Hey, if you're a Jimmy fan and you disagree, let me know where I got it wrong. I don't think so. And unfortunately, there probably aren't a lot of Jimmy fans watching. And I wish there were, because there's a lot to what Jimmy does. And certainly, again, his coverage of the war, the endless war in Ukraine, is really valuable. I mean, this stuff is really important that Jimmy does. And it's making a difference in a lot of ways. And a lot of people now are getting how bad endless war is because of Jimmy. A lot of people like me really recognize what a load of crap Russiagate was, and Ukrainegate for that matter, and how the media, by the way, not pro-progressive by any means, not even pro-liberal exactly, but pro-democratic, pro-corporate establishment our media is. This is not new to me. Look, we all pick and choose. We want to hear what we want to hear. We want to hear our own views backed up. I get that. But, at some point you got to be willing to recognize when people get things wrong and aren't telling you the truth and aren't honest brokers. And I fear that, I mean, it just seems like we can't do that. We just pick sides. And the sides we pick should be the sides that are telling us the truth. And the second they stop telling us the truth, let's stop being on their side, or they're not on our side. It's tough. It's tough to parse. It's tough to pick among different competing narratives. Jimmy's done a lot for us. I believe he's brought a lot of truth to the table. I really appreciate all of that. But man, no, you're wrong about this. RFK Jr., you're wrong about vaccines, as is RFK Jr. And you know where else you're wrong, Jimmy? You're just, and I played this the other day, and you're wrong about the climate crisis, the cataclysm. To claim somehow, to imply somehow that because Democrats talk the talk but don't walk the walk, that therefore they don't believe the climate cataclysm is real, and therefore maybe it isn't real? No, that's very dangerous stuff. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. Because no one else is prepared to address every issue on its terms using the right data. I know that sounds arrogant, but if you have someone else out there, let me know who it is. We pick and choose everything. I'm sure I get lots of things wrong too. All right, here's RFK Jr. being attacked. So we just saw Krystal attacked unfairly by a guy who a lot of times is right. Let's watch RFK Jr. get attacked by someone who's almost always wrong.
If you're really concerned about chemicals in the water, if you're really concerned about, industry like Big Pharma, but not just Big Pharma, running rampant and hurting the American people, I would imagine that you'd have a more robust pro-public ownership position on these kinds of things. But
I don't understand why. Why would you, Emma Vigeland from Sam Cedars Majority Report, why would you have a more robust public ownership? I mean, Russia, for example, had public ownership of the oil, has public ownership, I believe, maybe not right now, but it did. And it was disastrous for the environment there. I'm not saying that what we've done to the environment has been any good either. No, private ownership has also been monstrous when it comes to the environment. But I'm not clear that the environmental crises in Russia, due to the Communist Party's corrupt and incompetent operations of its oil, of its energy sector. I mean, you had Chernobyl under the Communist Party. So I don't get where your conclusion makes any sense to me, that somehow a more robust public ownership would solve the problem. Venezuela, now, I am not a Venezuela basher by any means. Venezuela has terrible environmental problems, and they have public ownership of their oil company, Citgo, until it was, well, the assets in the United States were seized by the U.S. government. But it is just not clear that private ownership will lead to better environmental results. There are ways using the market. In fact, again, you know where I am, fossil fuels tax. Use incentives, use market incentives to incentivize much better behavior by energy producers, and ultimately and quickly get them out of the fossil fuel industry. And how do you do that? You just make the price of their product, of their commodity, whatever it is, you make it so high that no one can afford it, that alternatives are all better. Maybe some people can afford it, but they wouldn't buy it because they can get something that's just as good for a quarter of the price. All right, let's get back to where Emma just blows this 100%.
Based on this answer, and Ryan Grimm flagged this on Twitter, it appears that RFK Jr. might be to the right of Saagar on this issue.
It's interesting to me. I heard.
All right, I don't see, to me, he might be on the right. Oh, scary. RFK Jr. might be the right of Saagar. Oh, no. Then how could we vote for him? I mean, let's not worry about whether he's to the left or the right. Let's look at what he's saying and determine if it makes sense, it's sensible, it would solve our problems.
Heard you talk a lot about corruption. We were talking here about the profit motive. I was surprised, though. You did the interview with the All In podcast. I knew that you were against nuclear power, but you was talking with something interesting, saying that we should have effectively a completely free market energy system. And I guess I wanted to talk, with somebody whose father and uncle famously supported major public initiatives, which didn't necessarily pay out, but which would yielded massive dividends in the future. Why should nuclear, solar, wind, or any power, honestly, float outside of public support systems if the overall social benefit of it unlocks economic potential? I'm just curious for the objection on the cost alone.
So I thought that was a good question. I think it's a fair question. I think there's a good answer. Let's see if RFK Jr. gives it, because I don't recall while watching this if he did.
I think the market is the best. I mean, here's the thing: we don't have free market capitalism. Let me just say
or
that.
free market energy.
No,
right? That's what I'm surprised.
We have the energy. The rules that govern the energy industry are written by the incumbents to benefit the dirtiest, filthiest, most poisonous, most toxic, most warmongering fuels from hell, rather than the cheap, clean, green, wholesome, and efficient fuels from heaven. In a true free market promotes efficiency. Efficiency means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. In a true free market would require us to properly value our natural resources, and it is the undervaluation of those resources that causes us.
All right, so I totally agree with that. I think that's a very good analysis by RFK Jr. I do remember listening to that and thinking, okay, he's making a good point. By the way, you heard one of the hosts on the program that actually, and I give them the credit that they played the full answer. Jimmy Dore didn't even play all of the question and answer that he mocked when Krystal Ball, said, well, he has an answer. When she said, well, you don't have a link between thimerosal and autism, and he's going to give you studies. Well, he didn't. And Jimmy just cut it off right there and said, oh, he's got an answer. He didn't have an answer. Here, though, so Jimmy defended RFK Jr. and attacked Krystal wrongly. Here, MR, Majority Report, whatever, is wrongly attacking RFK Jr. for saying that the market right now is not free. It doesn't correctly value our natural resources like clean air, clean water, trees, land. And of course, he's 100% right. That is correct. And there was a little bit of an exasperated, like, oh my God, how can he say this? But he's right. And you'll hear their criticism. It's complete BS. The way you value those, and you can't value anything perfectly, right? That would be the response. Well, how can you possibly value it? Well, we know it's really, really, really valuable, right? We know oxygen is really, really valuable. And when we burn fossil fuels, we take oxygen out of the atmosphere and we inject CO2 into it. So we know that's bad. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. We may not know exactly how bad, but we know it's really, really bad. So let's just start raising the price. We don't have to know exactly the number, the perfect amount to value. We couldn't even do it anyway. For some people, the cost is more than for others. You can't value it perfectly. Just say, and no one can. But the idea, well, there's no such thing as a perfectly efficient market. There's no such thing as sure. Does that mean we get rid of markets altogether? What's a better option? Fine. Markets aren't perfect. What is? Well, nothing's perfect. We're all struggling to just make things a little bit better than they are. Or maybe in this case, they have to be a lot better. We all die.
To use them wastefully.
So stupid.
In a true free market,
stupid.
you
No,
can't
it's
make
not.
yourself rich without making your neighbors rich, without enriching your community.
Well, and that's actually not complete BS. Because what he's saying is in a true free market where you have a willing buyer and a willing seller, you have a consensual exchange, only when you provide something that benefits your neighbor can you make a profit. And I think that's true. I mean, it's true to a degree. Now, people make bad decisions and they're stupid. And if you run a casino, you could beggar your neighbor. And it's not clear to me what benefit your neighbor gets out of that. You're taking advantage of their sickness, right? They're a gamaholic. They can't make a rational decision because they're mentally ill in that area. So it's not completely true what he's saying, but I guess you could argue, well, but in a truly efficient market, you would tax casinos at a very high rate so that whatever money they steal from, or they extort, or whatever word you want to use, from people who have a gambling disease, they have to disgorge at some point. So there are clearly areas where free market isn't a good option. It's not good in the healthcare industry because no one can really predict what their needs will be in the future. It's not good and he doesn't even believe that because he's for Medicare for all, RFK Jr. He doesn't believe in having for-profit healthcare. So he's not a complete believer in free markets. But when it comes to energy, I think it does make a ton of sense to have free markets as long as we do a couple things. We tax the bads, meaning the fossil fuel, meaning nuclear energy, because they're so dangerous. And also, we strictly regulate the distribution of electricity because it's a necessity in our society. Now, we can create it in a clean, green way, but we distribute it to make sure everyone gets enough. We make sure. Now, we could even do that via the free market if we have some kind of guaranteed minimum income, something of that sort, and everyone has, we prioritize good jobs for everybody. So that's possible. This is getting into the weeds. Bottom line is RFK Jr. saying we should rely on the market, but a truly free and efficient market that values our resources and doesn't allow for external costs at the level we have now. He's right. I mean, it's just that simple. And the fact that he's getting mocked by these yahoos on Cedar's show, Emma and her two guys, is just, I mean, it just reflects how bad that program is.
Polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor.
Certainly.
The most
They
asinine
raise
bullshit.
standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for the rest of us, and they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market.
The
You show me a
discipline?
polluter,
So
I'll show you
so
a subsidy.
pause it. It's
Oh.
if you look in the background, there's Hate Inc. by Matt Taibbi, and I find that interesting because Matt Taibbi ultimately landed on a critique of Wall Street that it wasn't actually a problem of capitalism; it was a problem of the state being in cahoots with banks, and actually free market capitalism is what we need to respond to the 2008 financial crisis. This is the exact same thing.
All right, well, yeah, I mean, you could make that argument fairly as well. I mean, we allowed the banks to get way too big to fail. And what that argument is that the response to the 2008 crisis should have been to say, hey, you made reckless decisions. You borrowed far more than your assets. You made huge risky bets. And like a gamaholic at a casino, you lost it all. So we're not going to help you out. In fact, we should help out the poor gamaholic. We're not going to help you out. So they did escape the discipline of the free market. So the argument that the markets don't work is kind of absurd. The market, it was socialism for the rich and capitalism, a kind of a rapacious, a soulless capitalism for the poor. All right, I'm going to let it go at this point, but to close out, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you'll reach out to me if you have questions, comments, concerns. Please please subscribe. I will add that, that's why I do this, because you don't get, I don't think, other programs that are able to provide this kind of granular critique of hosts even that I really like or I've liked in the past, including Krystal for sure, of Jimmy, as well as pointing out exactly how those who take a different tack, like the neolibs at I don't even know what they are, the partisan hacks at Cedar's program, how they handle it. So you all have a great weekend. I'll be back Monday.